Millionaire plans to humiliate the cleaning lady. But when she entered Dazzling, she silenced everyone. He invited her to a luxury party just to make her the butt of jokes, but no one expected the cleaning lady to appear with the elegance and poise of a princess. Looks of contempt turned to admiration, and he was the first to be left speechless. That night, the one who was humiliated was the millionaire himself. And the tables turned in a way no one imagined. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The elevator rose silently to the top floor of the most imposing commercial building in New York City. Richard Montgomery adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt and checked the Swiss watch on his wrist. At 38, he commanded a business empire that spanned 3 continents, but his greatest achievement wasn't the impressive numbers on the balance sheets. It was the respectful fear he inspired in every employee, from executives to the cleaning staff. The panoramic office offered a privileged view of the city bustling below. Richard observed the movement of people like someone contemplating ants in an anthill. Small, insignificant, easily replaceable. This philosophy had taken him to the top, eliminating sentimentalities he considered weaknesses of the weak. The secretary knocked discreetly on the door before entering. Megan was efficient, punctual, and knew exactly how to handle her boss's unpredictable temperament. "Mr. Montgomery, the guest list for the charity gala is ready for your approval," she announced, extending a leather folder. Richard flipped through the pages with calculated interest. The company's annual party attracted the business elite of the country. It was more than a social event. It was a demonstration of power, an opportunity to strengthen alliances and intimidate competitors. Each name on the list had been carefully selected for its relevance in the national economic landscape. "Someone is missing," he said suddenly, surprising Megan. "Sir, I want you to include Helen Sanders on the guest list." Megan quickly consulted her mental files. Helen Sanders, the cleaning staff member who worked the night shift, a simple woman always discreet who did her job without drawing attention. The secretary slightly furrowed her brow, but her experience had taught her not to question Richard's decisions, however strange they might seem. "Certainly, sir. Should I send the invitation to her address in the employee records?" "Yes, and Megan," Richard smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Make sure the invitation mentions that it's a gala. Formal attire required." As Megan withdrew to execute the order, Richard remained at the window, savoring in anticipation what he considered refined entertainment. He had observed Helen by chance a few weeks earlier during one of his nighttime inspections of the office. She was cleaning the windows with precise movements, completely oblivious to his presence. Something in her posture had deeply irritated him, a silent dignity that was out of place with her subordinate position. The idea had germinated slowly in his mind. Inviting a cleaning lady to an event frequented by the elite would be the kind of spectacle that would amuse his guests. He imagined the scene, Helen arriving out of place, embarrassed, clearly out of her element. It would be a living lesson about social hierarchies, a cruel reminder that everyone should know their place in the world. On the other side of the city, in a small apartment in Liberty Heights, Helen was finishing folding clean clothes when she heard the doorbell ring. Finding a visit during business hours strange, she opened the door to find an elegantly uniformed messenger. "Ms. Helen Sanders." "Yes, that's me. I have a special delivery for you." The cream envelope bore the golden crest of Montgomery Enterprises. Helen held it carefully, as if it might break between her fingers. For a moment she thought it might be some communication about work changes, or even a disguised dismissal. She sat in the small armchair that had belonged to her grandmother and opened the envelope carefully. The golden letters jumped from the paper. "You are honored to be invited to the annual charity gala of Montgomery Enterprises. The date, the time, the address of the most luxurious hotel in the city." And at the end, the observation that made her heart race. "Formal attire required." Helen reread the invitation 3 times, each reading bringing a different wave of emotions. confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dark suspicion. Why would Richard Montgomery invite her? They had barely exchanged words beyond the protocol greetings when they occasionally crossed paths in the corridors. She got up and walked to the small mirror in the hallway. The image that faced her was that of a 35-year-old woman with delicate features that fatigue had not completely erased. Her brown hair was tied in a simple bun, and she wore the basic clothes she usually wore for household activities. But for a moment, as if a curtain opened in her mind, Helen saw something different in the reflection. A posture that didn't match the simplicity of the clothes, a natural refinement in gestures, an innate elegance that seemed to struggle to emerge through the modest facade she had built over the years. She closed her eyes and for a moment allowed the memories to return. The ballroom of the family mansion, the etiquette lessons, the literary soirees, the trips to Europe. A life that seemed to belong to someone else, wrapped in a fog of pain and shame that she had chosen to forget. The doorbell rang again, interrupting her reflections. This time it was Mrs. Hope, the elderly neighbor who had become her confidant over the past few years. "Helen, my dear, you look like you've seen a ghost," observed the lady, noticing the paleness on her friend's face. "Maybe I have," murmured Helen, extending the invitation for Mrs. Hope to read. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses and examined the paper with growing attention. Her eyes widened when she understood the magnitude of what was before them. "My child, this is an invitation to New York's high society." "I know, and I have no idea why." Mrs. Hope observed Helen with a penetrating look, as if she were gathering pieces of a puzzle that she had begun to assemble since the day they met. She had always perceived something special in the young woman, the way she held a teacup, the cultured manner in which she expressed herself, even in the simplest conversations, the sophisticated books she saw piled in the small apartment. "What if it were a test?" suggested the elderly woman. "What kind of test? Maybe your boss has noticed something in you that you don't even recognize anymore." Helen shook her head, trying to dismiss thoughts that would lead her down paths she had sworn never to travel again. "Mrs. Hope, I am a cleaning staff member. This invitation is probably a mistake, or worse, some kind of cruel joke." The elderly woman held Helen's hands firmly. "It's the opportunity you've been waiting for, without knowing you were waiting." That night, Helen remained awake for hours, the invitation on the center table like a golden question mark demanding an answer. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember who she had been before everything collapsed. Before the losses, the betrayals, the desperate decision to disappear from the world that had once been hers by birthright. The invitation wasn't just for a party. It was a call to a choice that could change everything. The days following the receipt of the invitation passed in a strange duality for Helen. During the night shift at Montgomery Enterprises, she performed her cleaning tasks with the same precision, as always, but her mind buzzed with contradictory thoughts. Each time she passed Richard Montgomery's office, she felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, as if she were walking toward a precipice whose dimensions she couldn't calculate. At home, the invitation remained on the table, a constant reminder of the decision she needed to make. Helen had spent the last few years building a life of purposeful invisibility, a safe refuge where no one asked questions about her past or origins. The prospect of exposing herself again to the scrutiny of high society terrified her. It was during a break at work, while having coffee in the employee lounge, that she found by chance a business magazine forgotten on the table. The publication was open to an article about the main social events in New York. Its pages contained photographs from previous years of the Montgomery Enterprises charity gala, showing familiar faces that Helen immediately recognized. Her heart stopped when she saw in a smaller photo in the corner of the page the face of someone she had known in her youth. Christine Ferris, now identified as the wife of an important industrialist, had been her classmate at an exclusive school in the Upper East Side. At the time, they were close friends, sharing teenage dreams and secrets. The sight of that familiar face awakened a cascade of memories that Helen had kept carefully buried. The summer afternoons at the family estate, the debutante balls, the the vacation trips to Europe, the dinners where they discussed literature and philosophy with the most illustrious guests of New York society. That same night, upon arriving home, Helen made a decision that surprised her. She went to the small closet in the bedroom and, with trembling hands, moved some boxes until she found the one she was looking for. It was dusty, sealed with yellowed tape from time. She had sworn never to open it again. Inside the box, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, were the vestiges of her previous life. Photographs of the family in happy moments, some rare books she had managed to save from the liquidation of assets, and mainly, a small jewelry box that had belonged to her maternal grandmother. Among the jewels, she found what she was looking for: a family ring with the crest of the Sanders Mitchells, one of the oldest and most respected lineages of the New York aristocracy. For generations, her family had been synonymous with elegance, culture, and philanthropy, until everything collapsed in a matter of months. Helen slid the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in years, felt connected to the woman she used to be. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the recognition of a part of herself that had been suppressed, but never truly eliminated. The next morning, she took the courage to make a call she had postponed for days. She dialed the number she had found in the phone book, hoping it was still correct. Madame Rousseau's atelier, a familiar voice with a soft French accent answered. "Madame, this is Helen Sanders. I don't know if you remember me." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by an exclamation of genuine surprise. "Mon Dieu! Helen, my dear girl, of course I remember you. How are you? It's been so many years since we've spoken." Madame Rousseau had been the official dressmaker for the Sanders Mitchell family for more than 2 decades, a French woman who had arrived in the United States while still young and had won over the most demanding clientele of high society with her impeccable technique and absolute discretion. More than a professional, she had become a confidant of the family, someone who knew the intimate secrets and tragedies of many of the most prominent families in the city. "Madame, I need your help," Helen said, her voice revealing a vulnerability she rarely allowed to emerge. "Naturally, ma chérie, come see me today. Do you still have my address in Westchester?" The meeting with Madame Rousseau was filled with emotion. The dressmaker, now a lady with completely white hair but with the same penetrating eyes as always, received Helen in her atelier as if she were a daughter returning after a long journey. "You've grown and become an even more beautiful woman," observed Madame Rousseau, studying Helen with a professional eye. "But there's a sadness in your eyes that didn't exist before." Helen told her about the invitation, about her fears, and about the feeling of being pushed toward a world she had voluntarily abandoned. Madame Rousseau listened in silence, occasionally making small gestures of understanding. "My dear," the dressmaker finally said, "sometimes life gives us second chances in ways we don't expect. You can see this invitation as a cruelty, but I choose to see it as an opportunity for reunion, not just with society, but with yourself." Together they began to plan the transformation. Madame Rousseau had kept in her atelier some dresses she had created years ago for clients who never picked them up. One of them, a model in navy blue silk with an impeccable cut, seemed to have been made especially for Helen. "This dress was waiting for you," said the dressmaker with a mysterious smile. "Sometimes I feel that my profession is more about destiny than about fabric and thread." But preparation for the gala involved more than clothes. Helen needed to reconnect with social skills she had allowed to rust. Madame Rousseau offered to help her not only with the visual aspect, but also with the confidence necessary to face an environment that could prove hostile. "Remember, Helen," said the dressmaker while adjusting the dress, "you are not pretending to be someone you are not. You are simply remembering who you've always been." During the fittings, Helen looked at herself in the triple mirror of the atelier and was shocked by what she saw. The woman who looked back at her had a natural elegance that no adversity had managed to completely eliminate. The dress didn't just clothe her body, it seemed to restore her soul. "There is something I need to ask you," said Madame Rousseau, interrupting Helen's reflections. "Why did you disappear? All of us who knew your family were worried when you simply vanished." After Well, after the problems, Helen took a deep breath before answering. It was the first time in years that someone had questioned her directly about that dark period of her life. I couldn't face the shame, madame. Seeing everything my family had worked for generations collapse overnight. The friends who turned their backs on us, the creditors, the sensationalist press, it seemed easier to disappear and start from scratch. And now, do you still feel the same shame? Helen considered the question carefully. I don't know. Maybe this gala is a way to find out. When she left the atelier, Helen carried not just a dress but also a renewed sense of possibility. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine that she might belong again to the world that had once been her natural home. The tour. Night of the gala arrived with a mixture of expectation and nervousness that Helen hadn't felt in years. In front of the mirror in her small apartment, she barely recognized the woman who looked back at her. Madame Rousseau's navy blue dress fit perfectly on her body, and the borrowed shoes complemented the look with discreet elegance. Her grandmother's jewels, simple but refined, added the final touch of distinction. Mrs. Hope had insisted on accompanying her to the hotel, claiming she needed to see with her own eyes this miraculous transformation. The taxi traveled the streets of New York toward the Grand Hyatt, and with each block that brought them closer to their destination, Helen felt her heart beat faster. "You look beautiful, my child," murmured Mrs. Hope, squeezing her hand. "But more important than that, you're looking like yourself again." The hotel lobby was buzzing with the business elite of New York. Helen took a deep breath before exiting the taxi, remembering Madame Rousseau's advice: erect posture, firm steps, discreet but confident smile. It was like awakening muscles that had been dormant for years. When she handed over the invitation at the reception, she noticed the surprised look of the employee, who clearly did not expect someone like her to possess such a document. But her elegant posture and the impeccable quality of her attire quickly dispelled any doubt. The main ballroom was decorated with impressive refinement. White and gold flowers adorned round tables covered with fine fabrics, and a small string ensemble played classical music in a corner of the room. Guests circulated in small groups, champagne glasses in hand, animated conversations about business and society. Helen remained a few moments near the entrance, observing the scene and trying to locate familiar faces. It was then that she noticed several people had stopped their conversations and were observing her with poorly disguised curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, clearly intrigued by the presence of an unknown woman at such an exclusive event. From across the room, Richard Montgomery was conversing with a group of investors when he noticed Helen's arrival. His first impulse was one of malicious satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. She had taken the bait and appeared, probably embarrassed and out of place, ready to become the entertainment of the night. But when his eyes focused on the female figure near the entrance, Richard felt something completely unexpected. The woman he had invited out of cruelty didn't seem the least bit embarrassed or out of place. On the contrary, there was a natural elegance in her posture, a serene dignity that emanated confidence. He excused himself from the group of investors and walked toward Helen, driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain. With each step, it became clearer that he had severely underestimated the woman before him. "Good evening, Helen," he greeted her with the formality he reserved for important guests. "I'm glad you could attend." "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery," she responded with a calm, controlled voice. "Thank you for the invitation. The event is magnificent." Richard studied her face, looking for signs of the discomfort he expected to find. Instead, he saw serene eyes that looked at him directly, without submission or intimidation. There was something familiar in those eyes, but he couldn't identify what. "Allow me to introduce you to some guests," he said, deciding to accelerate what he imagined would be her public humiliation. He led Helen to a nearby group, which included Christine Ferris, the wife of the industrialist whom Helen had recognized in the magazine. Richard made the introductions with a slightly ironic tone, clearly expecting a reaction of discomfort. "I'd like to introduce you to Helen Sanders, one of our collaborators," he announced, deliberately emphasizing the word collaborators. What happened next left Richard completely disconcerted. Christine Ferris looked at Helen with growing attention, and her eyes widened in recognition. "My God! Helen? Helen Sanders Mitchell?" exclaimed Christine, almost letting the champagne glass slip from her hands. A tense silence settled over the small group. Helen took a deep breath, knowing that the moment of truth had come sooner than she expected. "Hello, Christine," she said with a genuine smile. "It's been a long time. But where have you been all these years? We looked for you when everything happened with your family, but you simply disappeared." Richard observed the scene with growing confusion. The dynamic was not developing as he had planned. Instead of embarrassment, he was witnessing an emotional reunion between people who clearly knew each other well. Other guests began to approach, attracted by the commotion. Some older faces also showed signs of recognition, and soon a small circle formed around Helen. "Helen Sanders Mitchell," murmured a grey-haired gentleman. "I knew your parents, admirable people. I deeply regret what happened." "Sanders Mitchell," repeated another guest. "The family that had that incredible charitable foundation? They supported so many noble causes in the city." Helen felt all attention turned to her, but strangely, she didn't feel exposed or vulnerable as she had feared. It was as if a dormant part of her personality was awakening, reminding her of how to navigate these social situations with grace and dignity. "Yes," she replied in a firm voice. "My parents dedicated their lives to helping the less fortunate. Even when we lost everything, they never abandoned their principles." "But what happened to you? How did you come to work for Montgomery Enterprises?" asked Christine with genuine concern. Helen briefly looked at Richard, who was observing the scene with an expression she couldn't decipher. She had planned, if questioned, to tell a summarized and discreet version of her story. But faced with those familiar faces, many of whom had known and respected her family, she decided to be completely honest. "When my parents passed away and we lost everything, I couldn't face the situation with the dignity they would have expected from me," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I ran away. I assumed a simpler identity and tried to start over far from everything that reminded me of what we had lost. It was cowardly of me, but at the time, it seemed the only way out." A murmur of understanding and sympathy ran through the group. Many, they had faced their own crises and understood the pressure that social expectations could exert. "And why did you decide to come back? Why accept this invitation?" someone asked. Helen looked again at Richard, who continued to observe her with an indescribable expression. For a moment, she wondered if she should reveal her suspicions about the true intentions behind the invitation. But something in the way he was observing her made her hesitate. "Sometimes life gives us unexpected opportunities to face our fears," she responded diplomatically. "Perhaps the time has come to stop running." Dinner was announced, and the guests began to move to their tables. Helen checked the card she had received at the entrance and located her place. To her surprise, she was seated at the main table close to Richard Montgomery and the most important guests of the night. During the meal, Helen found herself involved in stimulating conversations about art, literature, and social issues. It was as if a part of herself that had been dormant for years was finally awakening. Her opinions were heard with respect, and her unique perspective, someone who had experienced both abundance and need, brought a depth to the discussions that impressed those present. Richard, seated beside her, observed every gesture, every word, every reaction. The woman he had invited as an object of cruel entertainment was revealing herself to be the most fascinating person of the night. When the time came for speeches, the master of ceremonies announced that some special guests would share words about the theme of the night, overcoming and second chances. To everyone's surprise, including Helen's, her name was mentioned among the speakers. Richard had included her speech in the program as part of his original plan of humiliation. He expected her to stutter, to be embarrassed, and to provide the degrading spectacle he had imagined. Now, watching her rise with grace and head to the small stage, he felt a mixture of apprehension and genuine curiosity. Helen positioned herself in front of the microphone and for a moment observed the hall full of attentive faces. Many knew her from her past, others had just discovered her identity, but all were waiting to hear her story. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone. When I received the invitation to be here tonight, my first reaction was one of terror," she began, drawing some nervous laughter from the audience. "Not because I didn't want to be among you, but because for years I've been hiding from who I really am." Her voice gained strength and clarity as she continued. "My parents, Robert and Margaret Sanders Mitchell, dedicated their lives to believing that everyone deserves dignity and opportunities. When our family faced devastating financial difficulties, they maintained that belief until their last days. I unfortunately couldn't honor that legacy immediately." Helen paused, her eyes finding Richard's in the audience. "I chose invisibility instead of struggle. I preferred to hide rather than face the consequences of mistakes that weren't mine, but for which I felt responsible. For years I worked in silence, performing simple but honest tasks, trying to find value in myself through dignified work." A respectful silence dominated the hall. Many guests were visibly moved. "But tonight I realized something fundamental," she continued, her voice laden with controlled emotion. "No matter how low we fall, we can always choose to rise. No matter how many times we run from ourselves, we can always choose to face the truth. And the truth is that all of us, regardless of our social or professional position, have the potential to make a positive impact on the world." Helen looked directly at Richard as she concluded. "Sometimes situations that seem destined to diminish us are actually opportunities to discover our true strength. Gratitude to those who gave me this chance for rediscovery, even if that wasn't the original intention." The applause was deafening and prolonged. Many people stood up, clearly touched by Helen's honesty and courage. Richard remained seated, but his hands applauded automatically, while his mind processed the words he had just heard. After the speeches, Helen found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk, offer job opportunities, and reconnect her with social circles she had abandoned. It was surreal and exciting at the same time. Richard observed everything from a distance, feeling a strange transformation happening within himself. The woman he had tried to humiliate had revealed herself to be more worthy, more intelligent, and stronger than he had thought possible. Even more disturbing was the growing recognition that his motives for inviting her had been petty and cruel. When the crowd around Helen finally diminished, Richard approached. She saw him coming, and to his surprise, there was no anger in her eyes, only a serene tranquility. "May I speak with you privately?" he asked. They walked to a more reserved area of the hall, away from the other guests. "I need to apologize," began Richard, his voice lower than his habitually authoritative tone. "I invited you tonight with intentions that I now recognize as despicable. I expected to embarrass you, to use your presence as entertainment for my guests." Helen studied him for a moment before responding. "I suspected that, but you know what I discovered. It doesn't matter what your intentions were. What matters is what I chose to do with the opportunity that you, even inadvertently, offered me. How can you not be furious with me? Because I spent years nurturing anger at myself, at circumstances, at people who abandoned us when we needed them. Anger is a weight I choose not to carry anymore." Richard felt disarmed by this response. In his world of brutal business and constant competition, he rarely encountered people capable of such magnanimity. "You mentioned having worked in silence," he said, changing the subject. "I'd like to know more about your perspective regarding business. Your words tonight suggested a deep understanding of leadership and social impact." In the days following the event, Richard found himself constantly thinking about Helen and the words she had said. For the first time in years, he questioned his own motivations and methods of leadership. He decided to do something that shocked his team. He offered Helen a temporary consultative position in his company. "I want to understand how you see the business world," he explained during a meeting in his office. "Your unique perspective can bring valuable insights to our organization." Helen accepted the challenge, but with clear conditions. "I accept, but with the freedom to be completely honest about what I observe, even if that means criticizing established methods." In the following weeks, Helen immersed herself in the corporate world of Montgomery Enterprises with a completely new approach. She not only analyzed numbers and strategies, but also observed human dynamics, the impact of decisions on employees at all levels, and the missed opportunities to create genuine social value. Her initial proposals revolutionized entire departments. She suggested professional development programs for employees in subordinate positions, sustainability initiatives that could generate significant savings, and partnerships with social organizations that would strengthen the company's image while generating real positive impact. Richard observed these transformations with growing fascination. The woman he had tried to humiliate was slowly transforming his company from the inside out, and the results were unquestionably positive. More importantly, Helen was transforming himself. Their conversations extended beyond business hours, evolving from purely professional discussions to deep explorations of purpose, legacy, and the responsibility that comes with power. "Why did you become so distant from people?" asked Helen during one of these late conversations in the office. Richard considered the question carefully. "My father taught me that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness, that to lead, I needed to be feared, not loved. I built my career on that philosophy." "And did it work? In terms of financial success, yes, but..." He paused for a long time. "Looking at you, seeing how you lead through compassion and still command genuine respect, I begin to question if there were other paths." Months passed, and the partnership between them evolved from professional to personal. It wasn't a sudden romance, but a gradual growth of mutual admiration, respect, and eventually a deep love built on genuine understanding. Helen never completely abandoned her essential simplicity, but she regained confidence in her own capacity and value. Richard, in turn, discovered that true leadership came from the ability to elevate others, not diminish them. At the following year's charity gala, Helen was again present, but this time as co-organizer of the event, alongside Richard. The chosen theme was Transformation Through Compassion, and the event raised record funds for social projects. During their joint speech, Richard spoke openly about his own journey of transformation. "A year ago, I invited someone to this event with the worst possible intentions. That person not only forgave my cruelty, but taught me that true strength lies in the ability to transform negative situations into opportunities for growth." Helen completed, "And I learned that it's never too late to return to being who we really are, that we can honor our past without being prisoners to it, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in circumstances that initially seem adverse." At the end of the night, when the last guests were saying goodbye and the hall slowly emptied, Richard and Helen walked together on the hotel terrace, observing the lights of the city that stretched below them. "Do you believe in destiny?" asked Richard, holding Helen's hand. "I believe in choices," she replied, "and I believe that regardless of how we begin a story, we can always choose how it ends." Richard smiled, remembering the arrogance that had characterized him just a year before. "Then I choose that our story ends with two transformed hearts, two lives dedicated to making a difference, and a love built on the strongest possible foundation, mutual respect and joint growth." Helen rested her head on his shoulder. "For me, this isn't a story that ends. It's a story that's just beginning." And so what had begun as a cruel plan of humiliation transformed into the most beautiful story of redemption, growth, and true love. Two wounded souls found healing in each other, and together discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't in bank accounts or social prestige, but in the capacity to transform lives, beginning with their own. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen and Richard has touched your hearts the same way it touched ours. This narrative reminds us that we all carry within us the potential for transformation and redemption, regardless of our past mistakes or current circumstances. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this content. We have prepared a special playlist with equally touching stories about second chances and true love. You can find it by clicking here. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships and the beauty of personal transformation. Don't miss our upcoming content, and don't forget to tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. Your comments are the fuel that inspires us to continue.